And welcome into the Most Accurate Podcast. I'm Anthony Stalter. John Paulsen, my partner in crime, joining me as well. Welcome to another edition of the Most Accurate Podcast. John. It's already week 3, and I feel like this is the time of year we say, "Oh, it's already week 3." Can you believe it's like next week? It'll be. Can't believe it's week 4. Then 5. I don't know. I don't know why it starts in week 3, but it seems to be that way. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I think it's always funny when the season gets here and everybody's like, "Oh, the season's here. Can you believe the season's here?" And then we get into,
Right.
"Oh, it's this." The time just marches on, and we have no control over how fast or slow it goes. It's just perception to us. So that's some deep thinking there for you.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. We will get to the sleeper, John's sleeper of the week. So it's a sleeper sneaky start of the week. We're going to break down some of the Thursday night football storylines, and of course, this week's biggest fantasy storylines. John will kind of walk us through his thoughts on perhaps some of the bigger roster issues that people might be facing right now. Pertaining to week 3. But let's get into John's Thursday night takeaways. John, dealer's choice. Do you want to start with the Browns side of things, the winner side, or you want to start with Pittsburgh?
Let's talk about the Browns.
All right, so we'll start off with the winners of last night. Jacoby Brissett, 21 of 31, 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the Browns' 29-17 victory over the Steelers. He added 3 carries for 11 additional yards. Pretty efficient night. I don't know how many people started Jacoby Brissett in their year-long league, unless they're dealing with maybe an injury. Beyond that, your typical, for the most part, your typical stat lines. Kareem Hunt rushed 12 times for 47 yards. Caught 3 passes for an additional 14 yards. Cooper, actually, Amari Cooper was the star for the Browns. 7 catches on 11 targets for 101 yards and a touchdown. And Nick Chubb rushed 23 times for 113 yards and a touchdown. David Njoku, I thought, obviously had a big night as well, John. 9 catches on 10 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. What surprised you, and what was pretty predictable from the Browns side of things last night?
Well, I think if you look at the box score, this is about as good as you could hope for looking at the Browns offense from a fantasy perspective with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback and not Deshaun Watson. Like you're getting 113 yards out of Chubb with a touchdown. Cooper, as you mentioned, was great. That's his second straight good game for Amari Cooper. And then Njoku had the breakout performance that we were sort of hoping for him. And maybe this leads to more. Although it did sound like Kevin Stefanski said that the coverage was just dictating his production. They really like him as a run blocker. So we don't know if this is going to translate into a larger weekly role. But I think heading into the season, it really looked like this team was headed towards Cooper as the number 1 on target. And then maybe Njoku had a chance to be the number 2. And that's what you want with your fantasy tight end, is to find somebody that's a top 2 option in their offense. And the way that this Cleveland receiving corps is sort of set up, it's that number 2 job's up for grabs. Donovan Peoples-Jones was the guy in week 1. He had double-digit targets and just has been really quiet since. And then, Harrison Bryant, I think, looks like he took a back seat from a production standpoint, and Njoku took all those tight end yards. So, I think the only people that are probably disappointed are Kareem Hunt owners and, or I should say managers. And but he still ended up with 61 total yards, 3 catches, which is about his average since joining the Browns. I mean, he averages about 60 to 70 yards, and he just didn't get his touchdown like he usually does. He more than half the time he gets a touchdown. So pretty good outing, I think, from the Browns standpoint, if you have any of these players out there today or this week.
All right, so moving over to Pittsburgh, the stat lines for Najee Harris, 15 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Of course, the game kind of dictated once the Steelers started to fall behind, obviously Najee Harris, his role started to decrease. He also had 3 receptions for 5 additional yards. Deontay Johnson continues to be, the main guy for Mitchell Trubisky. Eight catches on 11 targets for 84 yards. Pat Freiermuth had kind of a quieter night based on what he did in the previous weeks. He only had 2 catches for 45 yards. But to me, the storyline, whether it's fantasy or otherwise, is that Mitch Trubisky is just he's Mitch Trubisky. I mean, 20 of 32 for 207 yards, 0 touchdowns, and he did have a rushing touchdown, which I quite frankly I thought that he was down. Not that you could maybe not overturn it, but my main point, I guess, is that, John, even the great thing that Mitch Trubisky did last night was questionable. 6.5 yards per attempt, and that came even when George Pickens made an absolutely sensational catch. I mean, I don't know if you're going to see one better outside of Odell Beckham's one-handed grab, but with him twisting and turning, that catch was darn near improbable, and he made it. I thought that we'd see more out of the rookie George Pickens, but again, aside from the incredible catch, but it's just been all Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth in this offense. But I do wonder when we see Kenny Pickett, John.
Yeah, and I would say you just kind of looking at the Steelers' record, they're 1-2 right now, and you wonder when do they press the panic button and decide that we need to try to save the season, and Mitch Trubisky's not getting it done, and we need to take a look at the rookie. Usually, it's week 3 or 4. That a highly drafted rookie will start make his first start if he doesn't start the season. Probably a little bit more patient. I don't know if it'll happen this week, but if they go 1-3, 1-4, then you would think that they might need to, press the eject button. The panic button. We now get the eject button. Yeah. I think that my takeaway from the Steelers is that, I mean, it's good to see George Pickens' target share grow. I mean, he'd been really quiet the first 2 weeks. He had 7 targets, but just 3 catches. Deontay Johnson is just steady as she goes. I mean, he just gets open and doesn't seem like the quarterback change is really affecting him too much. Just a really good player, route runner, and can get open at will. And I said in the preseason, quarterbacks tend to like players that can get open at will. And then Freiermuth, you mentioned him at halftime. I don't think he had a catch. So it was nice to see him get involved second half and get 41 yards in the second half. I just think you look at this passing game and there's not enough volume to support Johnson, Pickens, Claypool, and Freiermuth as starters, and then also get what you need out of Najee Harris. It's just the offense is not good enough to support all those players.
All right, let's talk about week three's biggest fantasy storylines. I want to start off with Christian Kirk. PFF tweeted out that Christian Kirk is a top 12 wide receiver in their receiving grades, yards per route run, yards per reception, and yards after catch per reception through 2 weeks. Is Christian Kirk for real from a fantasy perspective too?
Yeah, I think from looking at it, his role's been there. His targets did go from 12 in week 1 to 6 in week 2. That's a little bit alarming that you don't want your wide receiver 1 to have 6 targets. But given where you could have drafted Kirk during the fantasy draft, 7th, 8th round, he's really outperformed that. 6 catches in both of his games. Obviously, the 2 touchdowns last week masked any concerns you have about the volume against Indianapolis. But that, of course, was a game that Jacksonville led the entire way, and they really didn't need to throw the ball a whole lot. And I don't know that that's going to be their usual situation. The Jaguars, they tend to have to throw it. So, 18 points PPR week 1, 26 points PPR week 2. He's playing 90% or more of the snaps. And, as a free agent receiver, I, typically stay away from them. Given my research, it's, unless they get a quarterback upgrade and or a role upgrade, they typically will disappoint relative to what they did the previous season. But in this situation, I think the quarterback, in terms of throwing the ball, Lawrence has been fine relative to what Kyler Murray did for Christian Kirk last year. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback that Kyler Murray is, but in just terms of passing, he's been fine. And then obviously 9 targets per game is a role upgrade for him. He's the wide receiver 1 in that offense, and he's just unquestioned in terms of what his weekly workload will be. And they're using him in good ways. So I think he is a player that's for real. He's moving into the mid to high end wide receiver 2 rankings pretty much every week.
One player that is for real, we know it because of his rookie campaign, is Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts. However, if you drafted Kyle Pitts and you felt great about it because you landed one of the tight ends that was going to be productive in fantasy this year, you're obviously disappointed. He's got 4 catches for 38 touchdownless yards. So 0 scores thus far for Kyle Pitts. Arthur Smith, head coach and play caller, said that Kyle Pitts, the ball will find him. But Drake London has been Marcus Mariota's go-to guy. They continue to kind of spread the ball around to other players. I can't imagine, John, that Kyle Pitts will continue to post such, alarmingly poor fantasy numbers. But the fact does remain that Marcus Mariota is looking early and often to Drake London, the rookie out of USC. Unless they make a quarterback change, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Are you concerned about Kyle Pitts' production in this offense?
I mean, I've definitely been concerned with the results so far. He's got the 6th most air yards per game at the position, so that's not too alarming. I mean, the fundamentals are there. They're at least looking for him. The targets aren't great, five per game, but he had 7 in week 1 and 3 in week 2. And this is one of those situations where, you look at a player heading into the season and you see the quarterback change, and it can either be good or bad for the player. I think, coming in, we looked at this Atlanta team with Matt Ryan leaving. Matt Ryan has a history of, targeting his tight ends pretty consistently, and coming off the 1,000-yard season, it would have been preferable for Pitts if he had stayed in place, as opposed to having Marcus Mariota come in, because it sort of changes the dynamic of the offense. And then on top of that, you add Drake London, the number 1 receiver in the draft, and he is, turning out to be the real deal. So there's a couple of things working against Pitts right now. I think they'll get it sorted. I think he's too good. Arthur Smith's talking about how he's not playing fantasy football. He's trying to win games, and just the insanity of that statement, not understanding or just glossing over the fact that Kyle Pitts can help you win games. I mean, he drafted him very early in the 1st round for that reason. You don't want him to be a decoy or a blocker. The reason you drafted him is for him to catch passes downfield. Right. So I think this gets sorted, and I think the more that the reporters are asking him about it, he'll subconsciously or consciously try to get him going and get him more involved as the season wears on, because he can't, just sustain this low usage for Pitts when he's the number 2. I think, we were coming in thinking he might be the number 1 or the number 2 option in this offense. I think it's clear that he's probably number 2, but I mean, who's number 3? I mean, Patterson, maybe. It's like they just don't have a whole lot of talent after those 2 players. So, long story short, New Orleans Rams, 2 pretty good defenses. You're getting into Seattle, Cleveland, Tampa. They can't really run against, so maybe they'll throw more. Maybe there's a little stretch here where he can get it going.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Edwards, they acquired him in the offseason. Zacchaeus they have, but he's kind of more of the deep threat. You got to get Pitts involved. To your point, who else outside of Drake London and Patterson? Who else do you have to throw to? Now, Pitts did have kind of a slow start last year, and then he caught fire. So maybe we'll see a repeat of that, John. And as a Kyle Pitts owner or Kyle Pitts manager, I hope that's the case. Michael Gallup might be returning soon. I'll read you a couple of quotes here. Mike McCarthy discussed the Cowboys' decision to waive Dennis Houston. He said it's never easy to release a player, especially in season like that. But Gallup will have every opportunity, quote unquote, to get ready to play Monday versus the Giants, seeing full slate of practice reps this week. Again, Michael Gallup, according to McCarthy, will take the full slate of reps Monday night. Looks like a good possibility that Michael Gallup could return from that ACL injury, John. But from a fantasy perspective, how much do you think he'll be involved game 1?
I wouldn't want to start him week 1. This is a long layoff, player coming off the long layoff, and just want to, I think, ramp him up. I mean, there's have been cases where a player comes off of a long recovery like this and plays well and is a productive fantasy starter, but it's far and few between, and just don't have a whole lot of confidence, especially with this game being on Monday night, and maybe he's a late scratch and now you're stuck. So I think when you look at Gallup, I think he's definitely worth adding if he's available on the waiver wire. Heading into the season, we were thinking, Lamb is the number one option, Gallup is the number two, maybe Jalen Tolbert is number three. Tolbert has been a healthy scratch, and it's been Noah Brown, who really, since training camp, has earned himself a role. So, once Dak Prescott gets back, they have a pretty dangerous receiving core there if everybody's healthy and they can get Dalton Schultz back. I mean, that's a pretty good looking offense. I think, it's questionable whether or not Gallup will be the number two or the number three based on the way that Brown is playing, honestly. It's going to take a little time for Gallup to get back to where he was. I mean, as a 23-year-old in 2019, he had 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. That was pre-CeeDee Lamb, I believe. And then when Lamb and Cooper were in the offense, he had 843 yards, 5 touchdowns on 59 catches. So I think somewhere in between those two ranges, and you're talking like 53 yards per game to 79 yards per game, that's sort of the range for Gallup as the number two option. And if he's the number three option, he's probably going to be closer to that 52, 53 yards per game mark that he was hitting in 2020 once he's fully healthy. Again, he's got to get back into shape and get used to running all these routes. And then the other thing that you have to think about is Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush. I mean, there's a big difference there in quality of quarterback. I did say last week that maybe the wheels wouldn't fall off the offense with Cooper Rush at quarterback, and he did actually acquitted himself pretty well.
Yeah.
But he's not Dak Prescott in terms of the type of upside that he has on a weekly basis, supporting fantasy receivers. So you want Dak back, you want Gallup with his legs under him before you really want to run Gallup out there.
I'm a proud Central Michigan alum, so I'm a Cooper Rush fan, John. I'm not surprised that a fellow Chippewa is going to fight, even with Dak Prescott out. So nice job, Cooper Rush. Let's talk about some injuries now. Alvin Kamara, we'll start with him. He did not play, obviously, last week. He got in a limited workload in practice on Wednesday and Thursday. I like to remind people that John and I are recording this on Friday morning, so we don't have the full Friday practice report to look at. So it's just something to keep in mind. But Alvin Kamara, back-to-back limited practices Wednesday and Thursday. The Saints do have the early game in Carolina on Sunday. Two-part question for you. One, do you think Alvin Kamara plays? And two, if he's playing, he's got to be in your lineup, right?
Probably. I think heading into the season, I was a little low on him due to the splits that he's seen in terms of his touches with Mark Ingram active. His touches have decreased whenever Ingram's been healthy. We also have the kind of a quarterback change with Winston. You can't really trust his production that he had with Drew Brees versus Winston. It's two different quarterbacks. They have different plans for where the balls needs to go down. Brees was very happy to check it down to Kamara, whereas Winston, did target Kamara 4 times in that first week, but he only had 12 touches. I don't know if he left that game with this rib injury. I didn't watch that game specifically, but a little bit limited against Atlanta, which is a team that he should really be having one of his better games of the season against. So I think the big concern is that Ingram, vultures some touchdown red zone stuff. They've got Taysom Hill for that as well. So you may not see the touchdown upside as a runner with Kamara. And then, of course, the receiving core is a lot better than it's been in recent years. You Michael Thomas back after a long layoff, and Chris Olave looks like the real deal. And of course, Jarvis Landry, who just will get 6 or 7 targets every game. We just know it. You can book it. You may not want it, but he's gonna be pretty involved as the slot receiver. So does he have to be in your lineup? No, I think he profiles to me right now as a mid to high range RB2, just because he's not guaranteed that 18, 20 touch workload that we've seen him. When he gets that sort of workload, he's a top 5 back. But I don't think that, especially now he's got this rib injury, that they're really going to load him up like that when, they've got Ingram and a couple other running backs there.
All right, John, let's go through some injury roundup. I'll throw a bunch of names at you and just talk about kind of where they are right now in the week, and then you can give us your thoughts. But Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert both limited in practice over the last couple of days. Now they have the late game on Sunday. Jerry Jeudy did not practice on Thursday after suffering, the injury last week in that win over the Seahawks. The Sunday night football game is Denver. So KJ Hamler might be back this week. Michael Pittman limited early. He did not play last week for the Colts. That's an early game for the Colts this week. Gabe Davis looks good to go, and the Bills play early as well as they get that big matchup against Miami. And then Hunter Renfrow did not practice with a concussion, and he's an early game with the Las Vegas Raiders. So the names there, if you can kind of give your thoughts on the handful of names I just threw at you for fantasy managers and how they want to kind of handle things when it comes to those guys.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the confidence level that you have in these players coming back and starting them through an injury. Keenan Allen, I thought, might miss multiple weeks with this hamstring injury. So if he does play, I think I'll have him ranked below Mike Williams this week. Justin Herbert, our injury expert, Adam Hutchison, doesn't think he's going to play. He thinks he's going to miss a game, but he has been throwing at practice and is listed as day-to-day, although that's team speak, and Adam says that's team speak for week to week. So we'll see if Herbert's able to play. I think we'll probably know that with the overnight news update from Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport. But if you're heading into Sunday morning and you don't know if Herbert is going to be active, then I would seriously consider a pivot that's either late game pivot or just starting somebody in the early games that you have confidence in, because it's tough injury to play through, but he did towards the end of the game play pretty well. As for the Broncos, I don't think that Jerry Jeudy's going to play. I certainly wouldn't want to wait on him to Sunday night unless I had a really good pivot. It looks like Pittman will be back. We'll see. I think I'm really interested to see what they do with Ashton Dulin. They have this weird receiving core where they have Paris Campbell, who everybody raves about, but then he doesn't, when he gets into games, doesn't earn any targets. They have Alec Pierce, who's a little raw, but has great speed. They drafted him fairly early, and they want him to get him involved. And they've got this guy, Ashton Dulin, that all he does when he gets out there is catch passes. Yeah. It's like the old Chris Carter quote where all he does is catch touchdown passes. No, it's not touchdown passes for Dulin, but he's a pretty good athlete and his yards per route run has been solid. And I tweeted it out that what should happen is Dulin is the wide receiver 2 for the Colts, and I said what probably won't happen is Dulin is the wide receiver two for the Colts. So we'll see. I picked him up in a couple leagues, and I'm sitting on him right now. We'll see. Gabe Davis, fine to start him in his first game back. You don't want to bench him. He's obviously looked good in the week 1 and just destroyed KC in the playoffs, and just down the stretch last year looked great. So I think if he's good to go, he's good to go. And Hunter Renfrow, that was a wild finish to that Cardinals Raiders game. He had a rough last drive there.
That was a rough sequence.
So if he's out, I think it's Mac Hollins is one of these guys that's been around the league for a while, and he's been playing a lot of snaps. He would be, if he's out, if Renfro's out, I think Mac Hollins is a bit of a sneaky start. I wouldn't feel a whole lot of confidence starting him, but as a third option to Devontae and Darren Waller, if Devontae doesn't see the 17 targets that he saw in week 1 and they do any sort of job of limiting him, then he's got to throw to somebody else. And I think it'll be Waller and Hollins. So that's where I'm at in those players right now. Again, you got to pay attention over the weekend for updates, but you kind of have a feeling based on, today and the news that comes out today, whether or not they're going to play.
You just mentioned your sleepy. You just mentioned your sneaky starts, and of course that segues perfectly to the sleeper sneaky start of the week. This is John's favorite sneaky start of the week. It's brought to you by Sleeper, and Sleeper is one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the industry. And you can head to sleeper.com or download the latest app today. As John and I can both attest to, we use the app. It's easy to use. We draft with Sleeper. The last couple of years, our league for John and I has been done and handled through Sleeper, and To me, it's more user friendly than a lot of the other fantasy football websites that host year long leagues. I really enjoyed. I know, John, you do as well, but we're big fans of Sleeper.
Yeah, a great site to host. And I just want to know what the over under is on the week where you're not going to say the word sleepy as you're trying to get, trying to get into this segment.
You know
It's
what's
so
funny?
hard. It is sleeper, sneaky start of the week, but you've said sleepy the first 2 weeks.
Sleepy.
What is the over under on that, Anthony?
Oh man, I think I've cut down though. I think last week I said it 3,
A few
4,
times.
5 times. I think today's only been 2. So
You're treading
by
the right
week
way.
8, yeah, by week 8, I figured to have this right. Oh my god! All right, so
All right. So
yes, go ahead.
my sleeper sneaky start of the week is Miles Sanders. Maybe he's not that sleepy, but I also sleepy. Maybe he's
Sleepy.
not that sneaky.
I got you doing
Uh,
it.
but he's gotten off to a good start. I've actually been happy to see his usage and just his play because it was just kind of a weird offseason for him. He's telling fantasy owners not to draft him. He doesn't want to hear it from fantasy owners, and a lot of people didn't. I ended up with him in our league, Anthony, and I'm going to start him this week. Nice matchup this week against the Commanders. They've given up 191 total yards and a touchdown through two. Oh no, he's been producing 191 total yards and a touchdown through 2 games. The Commanders have yielded 155 total yards, 6.8 yards per carry to opposing backfields through 2 games. So really nice matchup. And this Philly offense just looks like it could be a juggernaut. And even if he's not getting a lot of goal line carries or a lot of touchdowns as a runner, he's going to fall into the end zone a couple times over the course of the season. He did get a touchdown in week 1. There was 2 other backfield touchdowns in week 1. But he may not have that weekly top upside as some of the bell cow backs, but he's a talented player and has been producing through 2 weeks, has a great matchup.
All right, let's get into one of my favorite segments that we do each and every week, and we've done this now for a couple of years. It's John's sneaky starts. If you go to 4for4.com, you can see the entire list. And I always want to make sure that I highlight this because if you're just watching this on YouTube, which we appreciate, thanks for listening, thanks for watching. But if you just do this, you're only getting a small snapshot of players that John considers to be sneaky starts for week 3. If you go to 4for4.com and you're a subscriber, you not only are you going to get John's rankings each and every week, you're going to get his sneaky starts article, and it's a list of players at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions that he views to be sneaky. Guys that could go off that maybe you're not thinking of. And I mention it every week. I typically go to that article first when I'm kind of setting some DFS lineups and looking for guys that are going to be lower cost that John feels as though could outperform what maybe their projections are. So without further ado, John, one of the quarterbacks that you like this week is a guy that we talked about earlier. It's Marcus Mariota going up against Seattle.
Yeah, he's been pretty good this year. And this is a list of guys that are pop out from the rankings as being ranked. They're being ranked higher than usual due to either nice matchups or injury situations. And I'm really excited. I just want to preview this is that next week is AFPA week. That's our adjusted fantasy points allowed week where we start using data from 2022 instead of using the data from last season. And that it's an exciting time because we now have that fresh data and can look at these matchups a little more closely. But Mariota, has a nice matchup against the Seahawks. They've given up 17.8 fantasy points to Russell Wilson in week 1. They gave up a combined 19.2 to Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo last week. And Mariota has been pretty competent, 16.6 points per game through 2 weeks from a fantasy standpoint. He is willing to run the ball. That obviously gives him a little bit of a floor. They aggressively ran him in week 1. If they get back to that, or perhaps he takes off and gets you 20, 30 yards rushing, then that gives you that floor that you're looking for. And I think Seattle is probably a team that will give up a touchdown or 2 through the air.
Some of the wide receivers that you like, Brashad Perryman and Russell Gage. Brashad Perryman, and he caught a touchdown last week. Russell Gage was one of the Buccaneers' free agent pickups from Atlanta, and both guys are going against your Packers.
Yeah, I have actually a long list of receivers this week that kind of popped, but I just picked my last two guys in the list, which are Perriman and Gage, and they sort of their upside sort of depends on the status of Julio Jones, who's we don't know yet if he's practicing today. I think he was limited on Friday last week and was a scratch. Mike Evans has lost his suspension appeal, and as a Packer fan, I'm really sad that Mike Evans isn't going to play in this game.
I bet.
But that's good. That statement's going to come back to bite me because I'm touting Perriman and Gage here. Perriman had a touchdown last week, 3 for 45 and a touchdown, 5 targets. Gage has not been real good so far, 7 for 41 and 8 targets in 2 games. But I think this is a situation where they're going to need him, and he's still sort of getting over. Maybe he's just getting over that hamstring preseason injury. So. The Packers defense is pretty good, but Tom Brady has to throw to somebody. They're not going to go. They might go run heavy, but they're not going to go super run heavy when they got Brady, and they're going to need to throw the ball some in this game. And I think those 2 players are worthy of spot starts if you're a little banged up at receiver.
All right, we wrap things up with Logan Thomas, tight end, who's going to face the Eagles. And as you can see from our graphic here, the Eagles have struggled against tight ends thus far, John.
Yeah, and Thomas is a player that was really flying under the radar all preseason because he's coming off this injury, and we weren't sure that he'd be ready for week 1 or really be out there and looking good in September. And he looks good in September. He's being used quite a bit in this offense. He's 4th in air yards at his position and has posted back-to-back games of at least 3 receptions and 5+ targets. So it's been a consistent. Obviously this Carson Wentz-led passing attack has been better than what we've expected as well. So, as we were chasing some of these breakout tight ends, these young guys in those 10 to 14 round range, Thomas is just sitting there as a player that you probably should have been drafting because he looks like he's back to his low end tight end 1 type numbers, which we could see this coming, but also at the same time, heading in, like we knew he had the talent to do this, or at least be, an every week starter at the position. But, given Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, a healthy Curtis Samuel, there was some question about whether or not he'd have enough targets in order to support it. But the Washington Commanders have thrown the ball enough, and Wentz has been good enough to support it. So he's got a nice matchup against the Eagles, who were 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends last year. They've given up an average of 10.9 half PPR points to Minnesota and Detroit tight ends. So this is, when you have these really good corners, sometimes the quarterbacks kind of shy away from throwing it at them and start to target the running backs and the tight ends across the middle of the field. So that might happen this week with Logan Thomas.
All right. Well, that'll do it for week 3's edition of the Most Accurate Podcast. You can see at the bottom of the graphic page here that you can follow John at 4for4_John. You can follow me as well at Anthony Stalter. Make sure that you check out 4for4.com for all of John's rankings. He updates them throughout the weekend based on injuries and latest information that might be coming out on Sunday to get you prepared for your fantasy leagues. When it comes to John's sneaky start articles, DFS articles, betting articles, you can find everything at 4for4.com, and the information is outstanding to get you ready for the entire weekend. John, I always look forward to recording the podcast with you, and we'll see you next Friday.
Sounds good. Week 3, here we come.
There we go. That'll do it. Appreciate everybody listening and watching. This is the Most Accurate Podcast.